Come on into my shed, see what I'm upcycling today. Hi there, welcome to my shed. I've been putting off this intro all week because I've had a head cold and I've lost my voice. It hasn't gotten any better, so I'm just gonna roll with it. Today's video is right full of thrift store finds that were really dated. These are some of my favorites that I've done in the past, and I'm excited to share them with you because there's all kinds of inspiration. So let's get started. We got lots of work. First project is this dated shelf that I found. It had this wooden heart on it, and I knew I could just pull off that wooden heart and start from scratch with just the shelf. It was just held in there with a couple nails. It was really easy to just pry off. I'm going to set the heart aside because we're going to turn that into another project later on. But I've cut a piece of pine the same size that's going to fit into the back of that shelf. I cut it to size with my jigsaw. It fit in there perfect, and then I added a couple finishing nails to hold it in place. It's looking so much better already. I painted it with some of my brown homemade chalk paint, let it dry completely. Now I'm going to add a little bit of Vaseline in any of the corners where it would have naturally aged, so it's going to create a chippy finish. And then I'm going to paint right over top of that with some of my homemade chalk paint. I have a fantastic recipe. I'll link it down in the description. If you haven't made any, give it a try. Once everything was completely dry, I took it outside and I sanded it down with an 80 grit sandpaper, and it left a fantastic chippy finish. And I'm going to put on some of my Mod Podge graphics. I printed off this graphic on my LaserJet printer, making sure to reverse the text, and then I'm going to put a light coat of Mod Podge matte over the entire graphic. I let it sit for 24 hours, and then I took a rag with a little bit of water on it, dampened the paper, rubbed all of the paper off, and we're left with a fantastic graphic. So I've taken this dated shelf and I've upcycled it into this beautiful farmhouse theme shelf that now would look perfect in any home, and it's way better than before. Next project was this wooden napkin holder that I found at the thrift store. Was really dated looking, had the orange stain on it. So I'm going to paint it with my homemade white chalk paint, and it's going to take a couple of coats to get it covered really well. Once everything had completely dried, I printed off this mail graphic on my LaserJet printer. We're going to use our Mod Podge matte to transfer the graphics onto my project. All of these graphics that I'm using today and any of these projects are available in my Etsy store. So if you want to check those out after the video, I'll put the link down below in the description. I'm going to make sure that I have it centered exactly where I want it, and then we're going to smooth out any bubbles and wrinkles, let it sit for 24 hours, and then we're going to dampen it, rub the paper off. I'm going to take it out and I'm going to sand it, and this is what I created. I transformed that napkin holder into a place to store your mail so it looks nice and pretty. Always see rolling pins at the thrift store. I'm going to put a little twist on it so it's just not a plain ordinary wooden rolling pin. I'm going to coat it with some black spray paint, let it dry completely, and then I'm going to go in and paint the white chalk paint on top of that, distressing around the edges. These rolling pins always look beautiful if you put a whole bunch of them in a basket and display them in the kitchen. We're going to put a bake graphic on this one. We're going to print this off regular computer paper, making sure to reverse the text, adding on the Mod Podge matte. We're going to let it sit overnight, and then we're going to dampen it with a little bit of water, rub off the paper, and we are going to be left with a fantastic graphic on this rolling pin. And then I'm going to seal it up with some polyacrylic sealer. Make sure when you're doing any of these projects that you're using a water-based sealer. If you use an oil base, then you're going to have your projects turn yellow. Add some ribbon and a burlap bow to the top to finish it off, and I think that it turned out absolutely adorable. So you can imagine the possibilities with this also to add to your kitchen decor if you have a farmhouse theme. Remember that heart that we took off that first shelf? I am going to make it rustic looking. I'm banging it up with a hammer, giving it lots of dings and nicks, and then I'm going to take some candle wax and put it all around the edge. Paint right over top of that with some brown chalk paint. Once that's dry, I'm going to put on some more wax, and And this is just a pillar candle from the dollar store that I'm using. And then we're going to add this beautiful turquoise on top of that. Let it completely dry, add on some more wax, and then put on our top coat, which is the white homemade chalk paint. Once everything was completely dry, I took it outside, took my 80 grit sander, and just really aggressively sanded it. I did this graphic in 2 steps. I wanted Pray Big to be bigger than Worry Small, so I printed it off twice, measuring it out so it would fit on my heart. Dampened it with a little bit of water, rubbed off the paper, and how cute is this? I just love the rustic feel of it. Now this key holder is really dated. I always hate painting over something like this because somebody's actually taken a lot of time to do it, but it needed a refresh. I went and sanded it really aggressively to get up as much paint as I could, and then I sealed it up with a primer so the paint didn't leach through. Once that was completely dry, I painted right over top of that primer with some homemade chalk paint, took it outside and really sanded it. Now for this graphic, I'm only going to use the word keys. So I sized it up so it would fit my project. I'm going to use a Mod Podge mat. I'm going to put it on exactly where we want it on the key holder. And I think this is just going to have more of a modern feel when it's all done. We're going to put on just a light coat of that Mod Podge mat. You don't need very much. Just a little tiny bit goes a long way and you can get a transfer. Get all the bubbles and wrinkles out of it, set it aside, let it dry. Dampen it with a wet rag the next day, rub off the paper. We're left with the keys graphic on this key holder, and I think this is way better updated. Next thrift store upcycle, I think this is actually the bottom of a butter dish. The top was missing. I picked it up really cheap at the thrift store, but I had an idea of what I wanted to do with it. I sprayed it with some black spray paint, letting it dry completely. And then I took it into the shed and I put on a coat of that white homemade chalk paint. I don't like to sand glass, so I just took the edges of my scissors and just went around the corners of this little dish, just scraping off until it came down to that layer of that black spray paint, and it just gives it that rustic feel. Now I know some of you are going to say, oh no, no more words, but there's a method to my madness. Everything that I put words on sell better. So I'm putting words on a lot of my projects because I don't want to have to sit on them. I want them to sell really well. And when I put a little word or a little quote on something, it sells way better. So I've printed off this sparkle on a piece of regular computer paper, put a little bit of Mod Podge on, put it exactly where I want it, let it sit for 24 hours, dampen it with a little rag. We're going to rub off that paper, and then we're going to seal it up with some polyacrylic sealer. Perfect little dish to keep your jewelry in. I hope you've enjoyed today's thrift store upcycles. They were all really dated, and I think they all turned out beautiful in the end. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video. And if you love this video, I'm sure you'll love either of these next two. Take care.